Hi there, I'm Alato, and this will be my second book review for this channel. Today, I'll be talking about The Hunt for Elsewhere. The Hunt for Elsewhere was published in 2013, making it a more recent addition to the xenofiction genre. It was written by Beatrix Vine, or better known as Benetta Celsor. Forgive me if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Who, as far as I can tell, hasn't published any other books. Although I might be wrong on this account, I don't really like to do too much on the authors because, my main focus is on the books, not them. The book is about a fox kit who is separated from his family and raised by a crow, who then dies and inspires the fox to bring the news to his living family. Along the way, he meets a lot of other animals, including men, and relies on the skills his adoptive father taught him to keep him safe. Generally, I'd rate this book a 5 out of 10. I have a lot of issues with it, although my main problem with The Hunt for Elsewhere is its odd world building. The book starts out with pretty warrior cats levels of fantasy, but soon switches to something more from out of Aesop's fables and back. It's something that the author definitely struggles to keep consistent throughout the novel. When the story began with a fox hunt and realistic animal parents, I wasn't really primed to accept the prey-predator friendships. It was incredibly jarring to see foxes and shrews talking to each other as if their natural predators were no threat after eating their friends. The choice the author made to have these kind of conversations between prey and predators was a huge mistake, considering the violence paired with it. The whole thing made me feel like all the predator animals were cannibals, since all the mammals are shown to have the same level of cognition. Other aspects of the world building aren't great. There's supposed to be these slurs for animals that are introduced early on, but they're all very lame two-word insults, so every time they're used, I can't help but just kind of roll my eyes at them, which is not what you want your reader to be doing at your fictional insults. The fact that the author couldn't come up with anything worse to call a crow than a sky murderer is a little telling of the thought that went into this whole thing. The insult that's used the most in the story is lonely thief, which is supposed to be like a slur against foxes specifically, but it doesn't really come off that way, despite the fact that that's clearly what it's supposed to be, and so it just reads like strangers are trying to ascribe traits onto the main character every few pages, which is kind of weird, but whatever. There are worse things about this book, I guess. Compared to the other problems I have, the fictional insults are kind of just, icing on the cake. In the story, the urban animals, such as crows and rats, know a lot of human culture and words, which on the surface makes sense and is a really nice touch that I genuinely like. They live in cities, and so the environment rubs off on them. But they know so much that it's kind of easy to forget that they're not people and are, in fact, animals. I don't think an owl should really know what's going on in the local news, especially if it's not a necessity to the story. It just adds more human traits to a book about animals that walk on all fours and kill each other. And that, once again, makes all the characters look like murderers and cannibals. The characters you're supposed to be rooting for and hoping the best for. Yeah, they all just look like murderers and cannibals now, because he put too many human traits on wild animals. Speaking of main characters we're supposed to love and be rooting for, I found the main character, Saxon, that's his name, very unlikable to read about. He was a boring personality starting out, although that could be attributed to him being just, a baby fox who has yet to develop a personality. He almost gets his adopted father killed 2 times and didn't seem to actually think about the consequences of his actions after the dangers had passed. He thinks about his sister in creepy ways that, removed from context, could very easily be mistaken for romantically. The author does these very weird, sudden shifts between portraying him as incompetent to competent to incompetent again early on that made no sense considering what the reader knew. It was like they expected me to just assume that Saxon had learned new skills after a time skip, but it never said he actually had, and so I didn't. As the books go on, the narrative tries to act like Saxon is some kind of super skilled hunter and fighter, but without actually showing him learning those skills or struggling to learn those skills, and, still reminding us that he's a very young adult, which makes him come off as, a huge Mary Sue, as much as I don't really like to use that word and was kind of looking for a replacement of it. He consistently wins fights against opponents that he just shouldn't. He doesn't take very long to learn how to hunt, despite the fact that he has to teach himself. He constantly gains the upper hand in situations he should not have it in. Very rarely does he ever do anything wrong, and when he does, the consequences are minimal. For example, when Saxon's actions lead to the death of a young bear, he's chased by the mother for more than half the book. He never really struggles to escape her, or at least it doesn't feel like a struggle, and is able to live mostly unhindered. Characters other than Saxon are either more interesting than him, not by very much, or one note. Personally, I'd rather read books from Quill's or Dante's perspective than Saxon. Quill is altruistic, and his witty personality makes him much more fun to read about. Dante, a wolf introduced later on, has a clear character arc to go through about getting over shame, as opposed to Saxon, who doesn't really feel like he has one at all. It makes me more frustrated to see them knowing that the author had the ability to write decent characters, but seemingly chose not to make the main protagonist one. There are a lot of characters introduced and left behind quickly, as most of this book is about traveling. They're pretty one-dimensional, with not a lot going on, just new shiny things to keep the reader engaged for longer between all the walking around. They serve their purpose, introducing conflicts for a few pages at a time, only to never really be brought up again. There's a huge problem with pacing in this story, considering that it's supposed to take around 2.5 years. The author doesn't ever go very long without taking a time skip, so it's hard to keep track of how much time has passed. And often I'll even forget what season it is until one of the characters just says it out loud. Most of the conflicts come and go in the span of a few pages, and the ones that should be focused on aren't enough to feel like any real staple of the book. For a book that seems to be about forming relationships, the author doesn't spend nearly enough time doing so, and it leaves everything feeling forced. Characters who should hate each other don't hate each other for as long as they need to for it to feel realistic. When Saxon grieves for the first major death in his life, there's dramatics put on for a page or so, but he doesn't think about the deceased in any mournful way much after that. It makes everything feel hollow and meaningless. Because of the plot, most of the time is spent on the move. This is fine. There's nothing inherently wrong with traveling books. There is a problem with how it's gone about, though. Traveling gives opportunity for the characters to be introduced to new, unusual settings, and this was utilized somewhat in the books, but it should have been leaned into more. Despite encountering lots of different human buildings and contraptions, the characters never express any confusion or wonder or fear towards their surroundings. They always know what the human things are and how to deal with them. They see some pretty crazy stuff for wild animals and have absolutely no reaction. Or maybe they do react, and I just don't realize it because Vine doesn't seem to ever describe anything. The frequent time skips make it hard to tell time, but also the fact that the seasons are almost never described. Is it warm? Is it cold? Is it humid? What about the noises? What do the characters hear in the distance? What do they feel under their paws? Is the grass lush, soft and green, or is it dry, brittle, and golden? I'm never told, and it is left to the reader to make up their own imagery. This gets even worse when the characters interact with man-made things. Vine seems to just hope that the reader can clearly imagine what a farm or ranch might look like instead of actually putting work into telling us. It's the laziest descriptive writing I've ever seen in a published book yet, although I probably don't read that many bad books, so, take that criticism with a grain of salt. Generally, I like the themes that this book is trying to push. Adopted family and altruism are shown as good things consistently. I have no problems with the bulk of what the books aim to say. But there is this one small part of the book that's weirdly anti-neutering and spaying, which I really dislike because there's no kind of counter for it, and it kind of just shows up and leaves with no explanation, no reason, no cause. And as someone who wants fewer animals to die in shelters, I am very pro-neutering and spaying, and I think that this kind of is a weird thing to put in a kid's book. Like, other xenofiction has covered this topic way more tastefully, and it kind of just sucks to see it handled this way when there's no reason to really handle it at all. I know I've said a lot of negative things about this book, but there are some positive things I can say. For one, the cover looks nice. I think the artist did a great job conveying the general vibe of the story. The concept was very interesting. It got me to pick up yet another Fox book at a time where I had already read a lot of Fox books and was kind of getting a little sick of it. So, that was a very good concept. The author did very well at giving the characters distinct voices. They definitely used the urban versus rural distinction to their advantage, It was very easy to, know who was speaking, what they meant, that sort of thing. Other than that, it's not very good. If you want to read it, I'd recommend picking up the Foxcraft series or Scary Stories for Young Foxes instead. From what I remember of them, Foxcraft was pretty okay, but nothing extraordinary, and Scary Stories is a great book that I can't wait to do a reread for review. Honestly, I feel kinda bad for being so blunt about my thoughts because, like I said, this is Vine's first published book, as far as I know. I don't want to put down anyone who's trying to make a living off their creations, but I am trying to keep my criticism as constructive and fair as possible. But, on the other hand, there's no way the author is ever going to see this video. So, I can say whatever I want and it wouldn't make any difference. And that's all I can really think to say right now. But if I missed anything important, feel free to mention it in the comments below. I like to hear other opinions, even if they're on things I dislike. It gives me a more well-rounded view of things, If you enjoyed the video, think about liking or subscribing, or even checking out my other socials in the description. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.